Okay, we're continuing on Daf Tov Tes Amud Beis, about maybe a dozen lines or so from the top. We're starting with the Mishnah. So we're continuing with the same trend that we've been discussing for the last several weeks, where the Gemara is talking about what happens if you find certain items. What's the requirement of the finder to hold them? Remember that in the mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda, there is, of course, the mitzvah of returning an item to an owner, a big mitzvah. It was in this week's parsha as well, in Parshas Mishpatim. In fact, in Parshas Mishpatim, they even talk about something more, I guess, more advanced, I would say, but certainly a more critical issue where you find something of your enemy. In other words, we're talking about just finding something, which is, of course, you find something, you have to return it. But what happens if you find something that belongs to someone who you're opposed to? He's your enemy, mamish. He's the mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda. That's a tremendous thing. In Parshas Mishpatim, we talk about it. And we said that mitzvah applies even if it's the donkey of your enemy or whoever it is. You have a mitzvah, Hashavas Aveda. But balanced with that is the question of whether what obligations does the finder have? How far down the line does he have to go to be matriach himself, to make it difficult or a little bit hard on himself to fulfill that mitzvah? That's what our Gemara has been talking about for the last few weeks. And we've been talking about a series of different types of findings, whether it's a live animal or something else. Now the Mishnah on Chav Tes Amud Beis is going to turn to a different chapter on the same subject. And we'll start. Matzah Sfarim. What happens if you find books? Sfarim. What do you do with Sfarim? How do you return them? So says the Mishnah, Korah behen echad l'shloshin yom. You should read in them once every 30 days. So the whole principle of this Mishnah is if you find items, inanimate items, that need some tweaking or some TLC in order for them not to, let's say, decay or fall apart or get exposed to the elements, you have to do certain things to them that will sort of keep them vibrant. So much as for him, he should read in the Sefer once every 30 days. What happens if he doesn't know how to read? Let's say from a Torah scroll. You open up a Sefer Torah. Not everybody is versed in how to read without Nakudas from a Sefer Torah. So what do? So he says the Mishnah, in any of the Alikros gololin, just roll it. In other words, by rolling the Sefer Torah, you're basically sort of exercising it, and thereby it's not decaying. Is kind of the best way to say it. Is you leave something totally inanimate without even moving or doing anything, then it could rot, or it could the pages could tend to brittle or something like that.
Comment.
Yeah,
I think it's very, very important to remember here that in the time of the Gemara, there were books besides the Sefer Torah, but we didn't have. It was not only before the printing press. There was anything had to be done by a scribe by hand.
Right.
Most people did not know how to. They knew how to read, weren't capable of writing anything significant because it was a tremendous amount of work.
Right.
So every book was incredibly valuable. Most of them were scrolls. I don't know what point exactly they went to having pages sewn together. There may have been some of that in the time of the Gemara, and of course the Gemara itself at that time, which we think of as a shelf full of books in every house, was all oral, and it was only little bits and pieces here besides Tanakh. You didn't have a whole lot of other written books.
Absolutely correct. Remember, we're in the time of Torah Shebaal Peh. Torah Shebaal Peh, everything was handwritten. Came along and he was Masader and he started writing. So that was about the 2nd century, let's just say, for discussion. So you're absolutely right that everything was oral, and rare was the book or the scroll that was written. So Torah, of course, had to be written on scrolls because that's the way we read the Torah. But if anybody else wanted to write something, they wrote it basically on parchment and rolled it. So he says that you have to golel, you have to roll it because we don't know if it's going to last if you don't at least air it out, so to speak. But now the Mishnah gives us a qualifier of a lo yilmod bahan betchila. If you find an object and you want to preserve it, you can't what we call making a laning. When you make a laning, you open up and you start learning something for the first time, you delve into it. You can't do that with that sefer. Avalo Yilmud behem betchila. He shouldn't make a laning on it where he doesn't really know what the written word is, and he's going to start delving into it. Why? Because he may start pulling it apart. In other words, the whole question here is preservation. We want to preserve this document. So if you learn a laning on it, then you're going to forget that it's really a delicate sort of item, and you're going to start getting into it. You could destroy it. Not only that, lo yikra ache imo, they shouldn't have two people learning from the same document, because for the same reason, if two people learn, this one will give a schlep here, this one will give a tug there, and before you know it, the sefer is going to be damaged. So those are the qualifiers. You're allowed to roll it, but you can't learn. Now, if you're just doing a quick review of something and you're going through it, you're reading it and you're opening it and you're airing it out. But if you start delving and learning, and somebody else learns with you and starts fetching and pulling and this and that you can't do. So those are the qualifiers, says the Mishnah, of what you do when you find Torah. Now,
Rabbi,
yeah,
Rabbi, I just want to bring a point to ponder. Here we are, we're talking about very few scrolls and words, writings. We're going back from the beginning. Here we are in the present century right now, and that just about every Jewish person either has or has access to everything that's in writing right now,
right.
either on a computer, tablet, or in their house. So I just wanted to, it's
Right.
something really interesting to try to fathom.
Right. No, absolutely. There was a time when it was so rare for someone to have a sefer to look into that everything had to be memorized, and that was the norm of the day. You're absolutely right. Today we take for granted that with a push of a button we have the entire 20 volumes of Shas and Torah and Nevi'im Ksuvim. It's amazing. Absolutely, very good point. So this Mishnah would possibly have to be edited for today's life, but again, in the time of the Gemara, that's what the reality was. Right. So that's with regard.
Jay has something to say.
Yeah, I was going to add one thing also is that like nowadays, especially with making a landing on somebody else's server. I mean, you might not going to schlepp or tug your because we're talking about a book, but you might still take your dog ear this or a highlight of this or notes in the margin and stuff like that. That happens a lot, and especially you're making a lane and you're like, I need to focus on this. I don't necessarily have a post-it note with me, so what am I going to dog ear this or whatever? So yeah.
So when two people are learning and one is learning and the other doesn't see well, he schleps it to his side so he can see it.
Exactly.
You know it's going back and forth, and it could tear apart the the parchment.
And if I could say one more thing, and I'll make it very brief, but I just, all this now reminded me also, I remember vividly, at least twice I remember, he probably gave it many times. I wasn't always a regular at the Shiur, where Rabbi Hyatt spoke about when a topic like this would come up or something in the news or whatever, that we are so blessed now. It's not just that we have the books available, we can go online, that it was such a huge deal when there were book burnings in France and other places, and where like 24 carts of Sfarim were burned and that kind of a thing, and how that would literally set back the entire city for years, because that was everything. Where today, and this is already several years ago, we said, we just call up a bookstore and in 24 hours we can have an entire library restocked with Gemaras and Meforshim and Chumashim and you name it in an instant. And we really don't appreciate what we have sometimes.
No, exactly right. I think that time goes so quickly and events move so quickly that we don't appreciate. Look, we take for granted because we're living in a time where everything is warp speed. But you have to think about that at the time of the Gemara and even thereafter, how difficult it was. And we're going to see in a minute, the Gemara is going to give us an interesting illustration of how rare books were as to how you treat them. Because books, for the Jewish people, books are the sort of the quintessential part of who we are. For the Goyim, for the rest of the world, some yes, some no. I mean, some are machshiv books, some are not machshiv books, but to us, the written word, the sefer, look what you do with a sefer. You bury it like a human being. You bury it in a grave. Why would you do that? Why don't you just toss it in the trash can? Because a sefer has kedusha, and a sefer is like it's like a Torah. It's like a person, a live person. Chas v'shalom. I mean, when he dies, you have to bury him. Same with Torah. So that shows you the cheshivos that we put on Sfarim. Now, the next part of the Mishnah goes away from Sfarim and tells us something else. Motzah shows Menara. If he finds, let's say, a garment, he finds a very nice blouse or an expensive, I don't know, suit or shirt or something that is that needs saving. So what he should do is he should sort of lay it out and put it down and pull it so that it should be totally aired. The idea is it should be aired, otherwise it might become musty and maybe moth-ridden or something like that. So he has to stretch it. When? Achat l'shloshim yom. So it seems like shloshim yom is the code for rehabilitation. That once every 30 days you're okay. The shotcha l'tzarcha, and he can shake it. In other words, you shake it out, I guess, just again to make it, to air it out. L'tzarcha, for its purpose, for its need, of a lo l'chvodo, but not for his covet. Meaning, we have something very expensive looking. It might even be doesn't have to be an item that you wear. It could be a carpet, let's say, or something that has some beauty to it, and he wants to show it off to people who are coming to his house for an event. Says the Mishnah, "Avoloi l'chvodo." He can't stretch it or shake it for his own honor, only for its benefit, and that's important. We'll see the Gemara talk about that. Klei kesef v'klei nechoshes, silver and copper, mishtamish behem l'tzarchan. Again, the Mishnah is telling us, and maybe this is something that we should or shouldn't know, is that these are items that have to be used. You can't just, I guess, store them. So he can be mishtamish l'tzarchan, avaloi l'sachkan, but not to overuse it. So you can use klei kesef from the koshish, but you can't abuse it, so to speak. Use it, but not abuse it. Klei zor v'klei zechukis. What about gold and glassware? Lo yiga b'hem at shiyover eliyahu. He should not touch them at all until the Yinavi comes and tells us who the owner, because these can't deteriorate. Gold and glass, and the Rashi will explain to us why in a minute. We'll look at Rashi, but they can't deteriorate, so you can't do it. Motza sako kupa. If he finds a sack or a box, little, he shouldn't take it. Okay, let's look at Rashi. Rashi will explain these to us, what these are all about. Okay, says Rashi, the second line, Akash l'shoshim yom, shemitafin, kishoim, luftchen, b'chol sform, b'shalahen hoya, osuyim, begilyon. Like you said, Menashe, that everything was done with a gilyon, with a parchment, a scroll. So what they used to do is that they would just roll these scrolls or open them up so that they could air out. I don't know. I mean, look, you as a Gabbai, as a practical matter, you probably roll every week because you roll a Sefer Torah, maybe from Parsha to Parsha or whatever it happens to be. So we're constantly taking these Sifrei Torah and sort of using them, even if they're not in the normal course, you're doing it.
Right. So that's a real issue. I know at Shomrei and I'm sure other places, we try to go ahead and we have for Rosh Chodesh or other things to go ahead and use a different Torah, not just to avoid rolling. Sometimes it'll be close by, a couple parshas away, wouldn't take long to roll, but so that the Torahs are in rotation, so to speak,
right,
and use, even if they're not used every week.
No, that's exactly the point. So that's a very good thing. And in some shuls, they actually have the Baal Koreh review the parsha ahead of time, just skimming through to make sure that there was no mistakes or problems. Sometimes you catch it, sometimes you don't, but that's a practice that some shuls do so that at least they have a heads up. If there's a major problem, they know it before Shabbos.
It says 30 days here. Is that a common practice to roll each? Because I don't think that we roll all of our Torahs every 30 days.
I don't think we do as a practical matter, but the Masha says the idea is that if you have Sifrei Torah in a shul, you rotate them. There's enough maybe different events that you could, even if it's not 30 days, you have a Rosh Chodesh, you have Monday, Thursday, you have Shabbos. you can start using the different Sifrei Torah so that they're all in use. So to speak.
The other mitigating factor we have, of course, is climate control. The heat, the cold, the humidity are largely under control. And in fact, that over the years was an issue at University Boulevard, that before they started having the nursery there, to basically keep the heat and the air conditioning running all the time, even if set back a little bit, because to protect the Sifrei Torah.
Yeah, now think about it. In the Middle East or in some other hot climates, if you don't have any air conditioning or anything else, and you have these Sifrei Torah sort of wrapped in cloth and then bunched next to other Sifrei Torah, you can see where they could start maybe decaying because the heat would be so overwhelming. So you got to do something to mitigate the heat. They didn't have air conditioning. So you're exactly right. So that was the whole purpose of it. Golin, see, Rashi says that air should get into it. The idea is that it should be aired out. Anything that you air out lasts longer. Okay. Two people each one will want to sort of look at it and pull it, and then it'll tear. Again, to gather air, that it shouldn't rot or you shouldn't have mold or other sort of, I don't know, whatever can plague a parchment, moths, let's say moths or whatever it happens to be. You put it into the earth. The way you guard kli kesef and kli nefoshes is you stick them into the ground, and that's how they preserve. He should use it from time to time so that the earth shouldn't make it decay. But that was the practice. Now, you can use them, but you shouldn't use them for long periods of time. Okay, in other words, use it but don't abuse it. Now, in terms of gold and glass, gold does not deteriorate in the ground. In other words, you put them in the ground, gold doesn't get affected, and you want to preserve the glass so it shouldn't break, so you stick it into the ground, and this way it can stay for long periods of time without deteriorating. Rashi she'ein darko lito davar shegenayu lo. In other words, if a person sees a sack or a box on the ground, here Rashi is talking about an Adam Chashuv who wouldn't bend down to pick something up. Like for instance, you have a Rosh Hashiva, Rabbi Einemer is walking on the street. It's not becovered for him to stoop down and to pick up, let's say, a dollar bill, as an example. I mean, most people would do it, some would, some wouldn't. But for an Adam Chashuv, it doesn't pass. It's not right. It's an embarrassment. Adam Chashuv, in darka little kupa shalo, he wouldn't pick up his own box. Now, he wouldn't bend down to pick it up. So listen how far this goes. If a person's an Adam Chashuv and he wouldn't pick up, it doesn't pass. It's a kenai, it's a busha. So he wouldn't pick it up. He doesn't have to pick it up, even if it's a Shabbos Aveda to somebody else. If he doesn't do it for himself, he doesn't have to do it. Why? Because the pasuk says v'hisalamta, and he'll sort of overlook it or not look at it. So what we learn out of the salamta, it has to be something that you would do in the normal course of events. So for you, for I, for almost anybody else, we will probably pick it up. It's not a big deal. Okay, chashuv, not chashuv. We don't consider ourselves to be, hoi polloi. So we do what we have to do. But there are people who are makbid on their kavod, and if they're makbid on their kavod, you can't ask them to do something they wouldn't do otherwise. That's a very interesting insight, by the way. So they're potter from Hashavas Aveda in that kind of circumstance. Okay, so now the Mishnah has given us some food for thought. Now we're going to get into the Gemara, and it's a very interesting analysis here. Omar Shmuel. What happens? This happens often. Person forgets his tefillin the line there. Someone walks along and he sees tefillin in the shuk. What should he do with the tefillin? Okay, it doesn't have a name on it the way we put our names on it now. Tefillin is black box like every other black box. What does he do with it? Says the Gemara, Sham demeim amenichem la'alta. He doesn't waste any time. He immediately evaluates its price and he sells it. You sell the tefillin and you take the money and you put it aside for the owner. That's what Shmuel says. Frek the Gemara, Masav Ravina. Ravina asks, we have a Mishnah Matzah Sfarim Korbehem Echad L'Shloshim Yom. You read it once every 30 days. In any of their likros, Golin in Sham Demeim Menichem Lo. You roll it, but you don't sell it. How could you come ahead and say that you take the tefillin, you don't even waste a minute, you sell it right away. You don't hold on to it. Maybe someone will announce, I lost my tefillin or something like that. You don't wait a breath. How can you, Shmuel, say that? We have the Farish Mishnah, which says, and L'chaira, we're paralleling tefillin to Sfarim, right? Davar Shebekadusha. How could you say, the Mishnah says the Farish, that it doesn't say you sell it. You hold on to it and you roll it, you do everything you can. So that's a Gavaldig Kasha on Shmuel. So now, this is the answer, and I was thinking about it when we were talking earlier, Nasha and the others. Abaya, tefillin, beibar chavu, mishkach, shchichi, sforim lo shchichi. You made the point, Nasha, I think, how difficult it was to gather sforim because they were hard to come by, because there were very few sforim. So sforim have a greater chashivas than tefillin. And not only that, but he says, and Bachavu L'chaira, I'm just throwing this out, probably was the equivalent of our, what's that big bookstore in New York that sells everything?
Eichlers.
What's that?
Eichlers.
Eichlers. Bachavu was the Eichlers of the Gemara. In other words, you needed a pair of tefillin, Bachavu made you tefillin, next day tefillin. So Bachavu, says Rashi, they were the major tefillin makers. To get tefillin was very easy. To get a sefer was not easy. Much harder to get a sefer than a pair of tefillin. Imagine that. So therefore, so Shmuel says, you know what? I understand why tefillin you can sell because tefillin are very fungible. Sfarim, you hold on to your sfarim because they're so rare. That's why the Mishnah says you roll it, you do everything to preserve it because the owner would want that sefer back. It's one of a kind, or two of, one of a handful of stuff. It's like a numbered painting. It's so rare that you want to have it. That's the chilik he makes. Says Rashi, Bebar chavu bebeis ploni ha'oset tefillin mitzuyim limka v'yachzer v'yiknem and hadamen. You can easily take the money and buy another pair of tefillin, but you can't easily get another sefer. So our Mishnah is saying that in the case of Sfarim, you have to be very, very dedicated and careful. You have to roll it, you have to do everything, because the whole purpose, remember, is to preserve for the owner. The idea of a Shabbos Aveda is that I care for what you own, and if I find it, I want to make sure it's preserved and good. So that, says the Mishnah, you have to roll and you have to dedicate yourself. But when it comes,
Grauman?
Yeah.
With that kind of logic, also in terms of the chashivos of the Sfarim, would that also make logically? Then you say that if you drop Chas v'Shalom, you drop a sefer or whatever, then they would also say, in theory, you might have to fast for dropping a sefer also, because if you're dropping tefillin, you fast for.
That's an interesting thing, right?
Because if you think about it, also that you drop a sefer, you'd be even say that the chashivas of a sefer is greater than tefillin. Then.
Right. So I can't tell you specific. Well, look, we know you got Chas v'Shalom the Sefer Torah, of course.
Gotcha, yeah. Right.
I don't know what they did with regular Sfarim. Another, if someone just wrote a Black Gemara or whatever, I don't know, whatever it was, and rolled into Sefer. Again, from a Kedusha standpoint, I don't know what they did. It seems to the Chayra that they wouldn't do too much, but maybe it was so kosher that they did something. I don't know. But you're right. The tefillin, Sefer Torah, these are Davar Shebekadusha. For these, we have to have a higher standard of care, and obviously, if it drops, then there's different shitas of what you do. It's a good point. Okay, fine. So now so it's not a kasha because Shmuel is talking about tefillin, which even though it's very chashuv, tefillin is something that's very chashuv, it was easily replaced. Sfarim are not easily replaced. Therefore, Sfarim need more tendering than tefillin. Fine. Okay, now,
Excuse me, Rabbi, wouldn't
Yeah.
you think that when it came to Sforim, scrolls that were very important, they probably built a little small container for it rather than just having it, sitting around open in terms of that. And tefillin also, we have boxes over our tefillin.
right.
I would imagine
No,
that
no, look, anybody who owns a Megillah probably has a Megillah holder. So
Yeah.
you're right, they have little holders that they would make out of leather or silver or
whatever, yeah.
something in order to preserve it. Absolutely. Again, you're talking about the Middle East, right? You're talking about Iraq, Iran, maybe Israel, these places. Weather was a big factor, and there was no climate control. So everything that you had to be preserved from the weather. So how do you preserve it from the weather? You box it, you wrap it, you open it up, you roll it, you put it back. It became so chashuv because it was so rare that it was like you owned a diamond. I mean, that's how rare it was. So they have to do everything possible. And that's why in the time of the Gemara, we understand what they're talking about is that they're talking about preserving something that was so rare and important and wasn't easily replaced. So
I was assuming that if they had a box or some sort of tube or whatever, they would have put their name on it. And in terms of losing things that don't have any identification of the name of the person should be a very rare thing.
Right, but you're right. So the question is, let's say it fell out of the tube. In other words, the tube may have had a siman, but the parsha itself, the document didn't have a siman. So if it fell out and you found the actual scroll without the siman, then you say to yourself, who does this belong to? Now, you might argue that it was so rare that everybody knew that Jay Parnas owned a document and there were very few other people. So you'd know to go to Jay and say, Jay, is this yours? Because there were so few of them. So you had to happen them.
They could have written their name on the scroll too.
I don't think no, look, we don't do it. I mean, I own a Megillah and I own a Sefer Torah, but I mean, I have a shtickle siman. I don't write my name on it, but I have a shtickle siman. So in those days, again, maybe they were just regular scrolls. You went to the sofa, you bought it, it was brand new. You didn't have a chance to scratch it or to do something with it. And anyway, if you did it, you would only write it on the outside. You wouldn't write it you wouldn't put a siman into the written portion. You probably do it on the outside of the parchment. But anyway, these are good points. And again, we have to sort of transpose ourselves to the first, second century when people were doing this, and it was just the very beginning of the written word, and it was very rare. Okay, now we're going to learn a brisa, which is going to be the subject of a lot of our discussion. Tana Rabbanim. So the rabbis learned as follows. Hashoel Sefer Torah mechaveru. If I borrow a Sefer Torah from my friend, harezeh lo yishalenu la'acher. I am not permitted to lend it to somebody else. In other words, I'm borrowing it from you. Between us, I have no license to say to Shimon, you need a Torah, I'll give you this Torah. Can't do it. Poscho v'korabo. Now, obviously, if he borrows the Sefer Torah, he's doing it to look at it. So he's allowed to open it and read in it. Remember, korebo, he's not learning the chatchila or he's not looking with a friend. He's just reading, which you may do. He shouldn't make a laning. Just like the Mishnah said, making a laning and learning with a friend is a recipe for a disaster, because in those kinds of situations, people will tend to, not intentionally, but they'll pull and push and they'll abuse the document. So if you're just opening up to read, no problem. But if you're doing anything else, no. As I look the brisa. The brisa goes on and says, "V'chein hamafkid sefer Torah." Hamafkid means a shemechin over here. Okay, you're not lending it as a shoel. You're just giving it to your friend Reuven. Do me a favor, Reuven. I'm going out of town. Hold my sefer Torah. Hamafkid sefer Torah es chavera. Gololo kol shnei osar chodesh. He has to roll it once every 12 months, not 30 days, says the brisa. but once every 12 months, he has to roll it for the same reasons we said before, to keep it fresh. Pascho v'korabo, he can open and read. Im bishvilo pascho aser. Now, a shoy machinam says this brisa is just that. He's supposed to guard it. So he has no business opening it up and reading it. If he rolls it and he happens to read it while he's rolling it, okay. But pascha v'korabo in bishvilo aser. In other words, he can't just say, you know what, I'd like to take a look at this sefer. He opens it up and he starts rolling and starts looking into the words, even if he's not laning, but he's just reading. Says the Brisa, a shoy mechinam can't do that. Look at Rashi. Gololo b'chol shneim also chodesh pam achas. Once every 12 months, he should roll it. Now, im b'shvilo pascho kulam meforish l'kameh. So we're going to have to hold off because this is where there's a very detailed discussion what it means b'shviloi pascho. He's opening it up for his own point, for his own reading. So the Gemara is going to explain that to us later on. But
Rabbi Grauman,
that's the brisa, yeah.
this actually aligns us more when you talk about the Sefer Torah and the shul also, because it is like a shomer chinam that the shul is basically watching your Sefer Torah for you also. And yeah, you don't have to really roll it except once every 12 months. And you can't, usually nobody's going to let you, the shul's going to say, no, you can't use that Sefer Torah to actually take a look. Only the shul Sefer Torah, you can actually to really look at, for checking and stuff like that.
Right. It's
So
interesting because we have a minig. I mean, not every shul may do this, but there's a minig when, if let's say a boy comes by mitzvah or something and he wants to practice, so he practices from the ticket. At some point in time, he goes into the shul, opens up rolls up the Sefer Torah, and he wants to read from the actual Torah because that's going to be his experience. So we don't frown on that, but remember again, he's not so much doing it for the Torah there. The Torah doesn't necessarily need that exposure, but he's doing it, but he's not learning from it. He's not laning from it. I mean, he's not doing a laning. He's just reading. So we're not as makbid now to say that he shouldn't do it. And again, it's not a found item. It's a whole different circumstance. It belongs to the shul or to someone else or whatever. So we're not as makbid. But you see and I'm sure every Sefer Torah and every shul is rolled at least once every 12 months in some fashion. So anyway, that's the brisa.
Actually, one goes down one to the line, a couple lines up about the that if you borrow it, you can read from it, but you can't lend it to somebody else. Now I just realized that actually enforces that we have a rule in the shul that when we loan out a Sefer Torah for a shiva house, that we only take a Sefer Torah that's a shul Sefer Torah, unless it's actually the family that loaned a Sefer Torah to the shul, of course. And now I realize that's not here all this time I'm thinking, a legal, secular law, legal liability if something happened. Here it is right here. We borrowed it. We can't loan it to somebody else.
Absolutely. Now, of course, if you give reshus, I did that one time with you, I gave reshus, but you're right, 100%. When you borrow something, you have no reshus. You're not the balabas to say, oh, now I can give it to Shimon or Levi. Again, you either have to ask reshus, but here, there's no reshus. I mean, the guy isn't here, and someone asks, can I borrow the Torah? The answer is no. The answer is no. Absolutely, good point. All right, so this is the brisa. We now have a brisa.
Rabbi, well, just for my edification, when you're talking about a Torah, I understand what you're saying, but if I loaned Menashe a book, just a book, not a Sefer Torah or anything like that, he still doesn't have the right to loan that out to
Absolutely correct. Does not have the right. And we
even though we're not talking about something that's going to, climate impact it or anything like that.
Absolutely. And you're going to see that this what you're asking is an important question in the Gemara. Why we pick a Sefer Torah? We could pick any other book to make the same point. Why a Sefer Torah? The Gemara is going to tell us why. But to your point, that's correct. The Sefer Torah, any Sefer are the same. They're the same. Okay. All right. So that's the brisa. So now we have a brisa, and we're going to discuss the brisa. Okay, before we discuss the brisa, there's a couple of other opinions. Sumchus Omer, the famous Sumchus, says B'chodosh, he wants to make a chilik between a new Torah and an old Torah. B'chodosh shloshim yom b'yoshin shnei masach chodesh. So Rashi explains to us, again, this is something that maybe we don't even know, but he's saying, where's that Rashi? And I think the Rashi actually comes a bit later, but he makes a chilik and he says that a chodosh is more susceptible to being destroyed than an old Sefer Torah. I would have thought the other way around, but that's what the Gemara says. Therefore, a new Sefer Torah has to be rolled every 30 days, but an old Sefer Torah that you already have broken in is once every 12 months. So I think it's a little counterintuitive, but that's apparently the way they found it, is that a new Sefer Torah, if you don't roll it more frequently, can somehow be destroyed more easily. I'm not sure why, but okay, that's what Sumpa says. Probably he had that experience, so he saw it and he said a chodesh 30 days, a yoshan, an older Sefer Torah, a year. Now, Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov Omer, Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov says, echad zeh ve'echad zeh shnei masach chodesh. He disputes Sumchus, and he says, no, there's no chilik between a new and old. It's only once every 12 months. Okay, we'll talk about that a little bit later, but that's a discussion within the Brisa there as to what the practical effects are of using a Sefer Torah. Okay, so now we answered the question, we have the Brisa, now goes the Gemara. Omar, okay, Omar, the master, I mean, one of the Rabbanim said, Hashoel, he's quoting the Brisa, Hashoel Sefer Torah Machavero, Arizeli Shalena La'achet. If you borrow a Sefer Torah, you borrow a Torah from your friend, you have no permission to lend it to someone else. Correct? The Gemara, Scott, to your question, my area Sefer Torah, afila kula milanami. Why are you picking a Sefer Torah? That's true of a Megillah. It's true of any Sefer. Again, in the time of the Gemara, remember that there was only a limited amount of things that were written on parchment. You didn't have what we have today. So why is he picking a Sefer Torah? What happens if it was a Nach, who was Sefer Yeshua, or he was talking Megillas Esther or Megillas Rus? Why are you picking on a Sefer Torah? I feel like kol milanami. Any Sefer should be the same thing, right? The Omar Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish said, Kan Shana Rebbe, this is what Rebbe learned. Eina shoel rishoel lahashil, veina soicher rishoel lahaskir. He made a general rule. A borrower can't lend, and a renter can't rent. If I rent from you, I can't turn around and charge someone else to be my subcontractor and rent from me. You can't do it. So if you can't do it, then why are you picking a Sefer Torah? That's a general rule. So that's the kasha. Why are you discussing this in context of Sefer Torah? Why didn't you discuss it in the context of any Sefer that you get, anything that you get, you can't turn around and pass it down without permission from the owner? So that's a good kasha. That's your kasha. Okay, so let's look at Rashi, because Rashi really gives us an insight here. My area Sefer, why do you pick a Sefer Torah? Shehu Noach v'hiskalkel the tashtuach v'kriya. In other words, a Sefer Torah, Rashi is telling us, is more easily damaged than another Sefer. So if a Sefer Torah can be more damaged, why do you pick that as the example for the general rule? Why don't you pick a Sefer that may be harder to destroy as the principle for the general rule? That's the kasha. Picking a Sefer Torah, the Sefer Torah we use often, it's more susceptible, so you can't lend it. Okay, but you can't lend any other Sefer as well. So that's, he wants to understand why you're picking a Sefer Torah as opposed to any other, or why you're using the language of the Sefer Torah instead of kol mili, any book, any document. Now, so, and he says, and the proof is because of what Rebbe said. Now let's look at this Rashi. This is an interesting Rashi. Kan Shona Rebbe, the Masechtas Gittin. This is what Rabbi Yehuda Nasi said in Masechtas Gittin. And now we have this before about a shaliach for a get, right? I can make a shaliach for a get. The question is, can a shaliach make a shaliach for a get? I make you Menashe my Shaliach, and you're going down, you're going, and you say, you know what? It's hard for me to get there. Jay, do you mind just delivering the get, and you'll be my Shaliach? Tanan, Hashaleach get the Eretz Yisrael. Remember, they were in Chutz La'aretz and Eretz Yisrael. It's a long trip. He can't get there. If someone sends a Shaliach to Eretz Yisrael, Harizem is Sholcho Biyad Acher. He is allowed to deliver it in the hands of another Shaliach. Perfectly fine. But, here's the but. The im Oma lo, let's say me, I'm the originator. I give the get. I tell you, Menashe, please deliver this get. And you're going to go ahead and deliver the get. But I also say, you know what, Menashe? While you're delivering the get, do me a favor and pick up a document for me and bring it back. So now you're not just a shaliach for the get, you're also a shaliach to take a document at some point and bring it back. Says Rashi, Omalo tol chayfetz ploni hayimenu lo yishal chenu biyad acher. You've now broken the chain, and you can't tell another shaliach, do me a favor, deliver the get, and bring the document back to me. In other words, he wants to make the shaliach to be the shaliach to deliver the get and to pick up the document and bring it back. Says Rashi, Lo yishal chenu biyad acher, she'em ritzona she'epikdona biyad acher. Because me, the originator, I asked you to do it. I didn't ask the third party to do it. And because I want you to do it, you can't slough that off on somebody else. The shlichus, you're allowed to slough off. The shlichus you can give to Jay and Jay can deliver it. But to pick up the document and bring it back, that you can't ask a third person to do. That has to be done personally. Yeah, Jay.
Suppose it takes two shluchim to get all the way to the other side of the world. He gives it to one who says, I'm going to go, to London from Eretz Yisrael, but you give it to somebody else in London who I've hired to take it all the way to New York.
If you tell that to me, the originator, and you say, I will be happy to do the shlichus, but I can only do half the shlichus. So in terms of giving it to the other guy, Rashi says it's never a problem. But let's say you ask me to pick something up from Eretz Yisrael and bring it back, and you say to me, the originator, I can't do that for you because I'm only going to London. Then you have to get my permission. You have to get my permission to allow the second shaliach to be the one who brings it back. If you don't ask permission, says Rashi, you can't do it. In other words, my expectation is that if I ask you, because it's you, I want you, Jay, to do it because I trust you, then you're the one who has to do it. So unless you speak it out in advance and let me know that I can't do it, I can help you, but I can't do it, then it's not permissible. You can give it to the shaliach to deliver to the isha, for the divorce, but you can't reciprocate and ask the shaliach to bring back the document. So says Rashi, he doesn't want the other guy to have it. Rav Shlakish, Allah, Kanshno Rebbe. This is what Rashi said in the Mishnah. Lamadnu Rebbe Shestam HaMishnayos Ein HaShoyel Yachalisho the Bekula Shayach Lamema Ein Ritzona Shebigdono Biyadache. In other words, for some reason, this bikadom, this item that is going to be picked up from the end point to be brought back to me may have been something that was so valuable or so important that I only trusted you, Jay. I didn't trust you to tell Shimon, bring it back to me and I'll bring it back to the.
But we're talking about two separate things. The return document has nothing to do with the get.
Correct. So the get is no problem. Get is no problem.
So the get makes it all the way to New York.
No problem.
There's something in New York that has to be brought back. The shaliach is asking somehow the one in New York to say, bring something back. It's not the middleman who's telling New York to bring something back to Eretz Yisrael or back to London and back to Eretz Yisrael. Why are the two being mixed up here?
But listen, we're trying to learn, where do we know this principle that a borrower can't lend? If I borrow from you, I can't lend it to someone else. How do we know it? Says the Gemara, it's from Rebbe in the Gemara in Gittin. Why? Because in the Gemara in Gittin, we have a situation where a man gave a get to Eretz Yisrael. He was living in Chutz La'aretz, and he gave a shaliach to send the get. Says the Gemara there in Gittin, it's perfectly fine for the shaliach to make a shaliach because that's something that the sender would not object to. Fine, end of story. Good. However, there's a little twist. If he asks the shaliach to bring something back to him, that request can't be passed on to somebody else. That's what the Gemara means. Eina shoel yochel lishol, that a borrower cannot reborrow. He can't reborrow it, or a seicha can't resell. Says the Gemara, that's where Rabbi learns it from. He learns it from that Gemara in Gittin, where a person is makbid, a person is particular in what he wants. And if I wanted you, Jay, to pick up this item, whatever it was, and bring it back to you, without reshus, you can't do it. I mean, lahavdil.
So what happened in that story when he's in New York and he's trying to get to Eretz Yisrael, and the first shaliach can only go to London, and there's he'll find the second shaliach.
No, the outgoing get is never the problem. The outgoing get, it's assumed. We're even assuming that a shaliach might make a shaliach, and that doesn't disturb us. Because
why would he trust the second shaliach going eastbound?
Because
Same question, why wouldn't you trust going westbound?
Well, obviously, you see there is a killing between giving a get, which is the norm is to send a shaliach, and if the shaliach can't complete it, another shaliach is okay. That was the standard, okay? That was the standard. And whether or not in a non-get situation, which is the norm, you can do something similar to a get and have a shaliach bring it back. Let me give you an example, and Yale is here. In our law today, if I sign a contract, a lease, I can't sublease without the landlord's permission. Not allowed to do it.
Correct.
Because it's a contract between me and him. And if I want to do that, I have to have permission. Now, oftentimes you sublease for more money. And the question is, will I enrich myself because I'm going to sublease to somebody else? So the landlord could say, I'll allow you to do it and we'll split the profit or something like that. But you see that law has sort of devolved to our time as well, is that it's not permissible when you have a contract or an agreement to go beyond the agreement and do something that wasn't in the deal. Now, you're asking a good question, Jay. Why is a get yes and a document not? The teretz is because in a get, everybody assumes, I want to get that get to my wife. That's my objective. If it comes to one or two or three people, I'm not makbid. I just want her to get it in a proper fashion. So no one is really makbid that you have to be the one. No one's makbid that you have to be the one. But if I want a diamond or something of expense, and I say, Jay, you're my man, you're going to bring it back to me. You don't have a reshus to say to Shimon, you're my man. You're going to do it for me, so I can do it for Tuvia. You can't.
So let's say there's a credit card that has to come from Eretz Yisrael back to New York.
Right. And a credit card, you want to preserve it to make sure no one is going to use it. Right.
Right. So when the get gets to Eretz Yisrael, it's delivered through a second shliach, not the first one.
Right.
Right. And he's given the credit card because he's doing a round trip to London or whatever. He takes it back to London, and right away you say that first leg is a problem because the New York person didn't authorize.
That's correct.
Second shliach to bring it to
unless
London.
I gave specific reshus that someone can be the sub shliach to return it to me. The assumption is you can't do it, and that's the source of.
What happens if he does it? If he brings the credit card back to London, then he meets the London authorized shaliach to take it on a nonstop to New York.
Look, if he does it, but it's not proper. In other words, Rish Lakish learns out his law from the. You're right. I mean, Lamaisa, if someone does it, what am I going to do? Return the credit card? You're bringing it to me anyway. But lahalacha, he's saying that's not proper. It's not proper for the shaliach to hire a shaliach to bring back something that the original owner, because if the original owner asked me, he asked me, not you. And so that's, I mean, yeah, and that's the concept. I understand your question, but that's the concept. And from that Gemara, Rish Lakish learns out that in a show, so okay, so that's the thing. Now we're running a little bit, so let's just finish it. So Frank the Gemara. So now we have a kasha. Why did he pick a Sefer Torah? Why not any document, any book, any sefer should be subject to this? Why pick a Sefer Torah, which Rashi says is more susceptible to damage than anything else? Says the Gemara, Sefer Torah, it's l'chalo. We're picking a Sefer Torah for a reason. Mahu detema. I would have thought, listen to this, and Menashe, to your point, I would have thought, you know what? I have a Sefer Torah. Sefer Torah is chashuv. There aren't that many. Okay, someone needs the Sefer Torah. Go and use my Sefer Torah. My Sefer Torah, it's my Sefer Torah, but Hashem ha'aretz ha'maloah. Everything belongs to the Rebbeinu Shalom. I'm the shaliach. I happen to have the custody of this Sefer Torah. Do I really care if you make a bar mitzvah or a simcha and you want to use my Sefer Torah? L'chayra not. Mahu detema. I would have thought that a Jew feels very good about someone else using my item for a mitzvah. I feel very good that my Sefer Torah is being used for a mitzvah. Kamash malan, the Gemara says, no, even in a case where you would think that it would be the right thing to do, to let that Sefer Torah be used, even without permission, for someone else, you can't do it. So now this is the law, and Menashe, you're right when you said before that you can't take a Sefer Torah that doesn't belong, let's say, to the shul and just let someone else use it, even though l'chayra it's a mitzvah, right? If someone's reading from a Sefer Torah, so says the Gemara, the reason why we picked Sefer Torah is because all the other books have no chiyuv. In other words, they used to write Megillas and other things, but you don't have to read from a Megillah. You can read from a Sefer, right? Not everybody reads from Klaf. The only obligation is to read from a Sefer Torah. So you would think from a Sefer Torah, since it's an obligation, everybody should have access. Says the Gemara, no, that this mitzvah of Hashoel lo yachal lahashil applies even to Sefer Torah, which is the most, say, used or the most easily accepted form of reading, because you have to read from the Torah. Can you imagine? I have one Sefer Torah, and we read from the Sefer Torah. It's my Sefer Torah, and I don't allow anybody to use it. So all the people who can't get to shul can't read a Torah on Shabbos. I mean, it's astounding. Wouldn't you think that I would love for everybody to read from the Sefer Torah? Teretz is, without permission, you can't do it. You cannot do it without permission. Okay, so I think we'll stop here because, again, we'll continue talking about this brisa, but you just get a sense here. It isn't, and again, from the kashas and from our discussion here, it's not that simple. You would think, oh, wow, it's no big deal. You'll use it, I'll use it, send it here, send it there. Teretz is that there are halachas, and the halachas are learned from sources. So even though something might be obvious that you should do it without a proper sort of chain of command, you can't do it. Now, your question, Jay, is an interesting one, because by get, since it's a mitzvah aseh midoraisa, that he has to give the get, I think we're not as makbid, because we want that mitzvah to be performed. So if he can't get the get to the woman, it's going to impact her ability to marry, et cetera, et cetera. So maybe we're a little bit more makel, and we say that a shaliach can make a shaliach, as long as it's done properly, we're not going to be makbid.
The thing that gets complicated is that shaliach has been validated as being an honest, trustworthy chazaka because he delivered the get in Eretz Yisrael. He should be trusted to go back to London with the credit card.
Except for that little caveat that Rebbe says that, and again, we're distinguishing the outgoing get from the incoming item.
Credit card, whatever.
And credit card. And we're saying that, and again, I think the theory here is that a get is something, if it's going to be given, everybody wants it to happen because the woman won't be an Eish Ish, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So we're a little bit more makel, and we say as long as the chain of command isn't broken or the chain of custody isn't broken, it's okay. Now you're talking about a personal item where I ask you bring this item back to me. I didn't ask for Reuven to bring it back to me. I asked for you to bring it back to me. That's where the Mishnah says, Hashoel lo yochel lahashil. You can ask me for permission. You can see, I'm only going to London. Do you mind if my good friend who's trustworthy brings it to me from Eretz Yisrael to London, and I'll bring it back to you? I can say yes, I can say no, but you have to ask my permission.
Yeah.
Whereas
okay,
with a get, you don't have to ask for permission
Okay.
because it's in the public interest, it's in the public
Have it
interest
delivered.
for that get to be delivered. Exactly.
Very, that's a subtle explanation
That's a subtle explanation. I
about
think.
permissions, right?
Right, because we learned this in the Gemara in Gittin, and we had it earlier in our Gemara.
I didn't get it before. Now I
Gittin, a
understand.
shaliach is allowed to make a shaliach. Exactly. Okay,
Go on.
so we'll stop
Rabbi.
here. And Mr. Shem.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
before you end, on the Sefer Torah.
Yeah.
You can give a blanket permission, like you can tell the shul, if anybody needs a Sefer Torah to use, you're welcome to lend it out. Can you
Exactly.
not?
Exactly. Our Bryce is talking about where I borrow it or you give it to me to hold as upikadon without conditions. You didn't say give it to anybody. So without specific permission, you're not allowed to say, I'm the balabas, I'm going to lend it to somebody else because I think they need to hear the Sefer Torah. It's a very nice gesture that you should, someone else should hear the Sefer Torah, but you have to ask permission. That's the point. And you would have thought with a Sefer Torah, why do you need permission? Everybody needs to learn. Everybody needs to hear the Torah. Why do you need permission from the owner to do a mitzvah for somebody else? Teretz says you do. That shows you the extent to which the Torah is telling us that a person who owns something, you can't violate his trust and his ownership by subsuming that that's what he would want. And that's the Gemara says, that's why we picked the Sefer Torah. Because Mahu the Tema, I would have thought that everybody would, I have no problem with anybody using my Sefer Torah. Says the Gemara, I do have a problem. If you don't ask permission, you can't use it. So that's a very important factor here. But you're right, David. If I give a blanket permission that the shul can lend it out if someone needs it, of course I've given permission. Teretz says if you don't give permission, is someone else allowed to assume that you would give permission and do it on his own? Says the Gemara, no. That the Brisa says that you can't do that. You have to ask for rishus, and that's an important. Again, we're balancing. This is always a balancing test between an owner and you know, I have to say that I've seen it enough times. You probably have too, where someone violates this by saying, "Oh, Mistama, he would like someone to use it." But if you are the custodian, like Menashe, you're the Gabbai, and you're the custodian, someone comes to you, as much as you want to give the Sefer Torah for someone to read, you have to say, I don't have reshus. There's a halacha. The halacha says that I have to be given permission to do this, and I can't violate that. And this is what Rosh Lakish is saying. We learned it from that Gemara in Gittin, that some things you can do, some things you can't do. And you can't just sua sponte, like on your own, say, it's okay, I'm giving permission. It's under my responsibility. You don't have that right. You don't have that right. So that's what the Gemara is. So we'll stop here and then we'll pick up Mitzvah next week because this is continuing to be an interesting. So you see now, again, like our Gemaras in the past, it's not so simple. Again, if you're a finder, what do you do? I mean, and the Gemara will continue into the next stop and give us other examples from all these other cases in the Mishnah. What do you do if you're a finder? How do you balance yourself from returning it to the owner to protecting the item itself? So Mitzvah Shem will continue next week.
Shikoah.
Ah,
Thank you.
Good discussion.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
have a great week, everyone.